Her hands wouldn't stop shaking as she pulled her sleeve down over the burn, sunglasses on, 6 in the morning, hiding in a diner booth from a man who was supposed to love her. Nobody looked twice, except the biker in the corner, the one everyone else had already decided to fear. He didn't ask permission to care. He just crouched down, met her eyes, and said 4 words that would change everything. "You're safe right now." What she whispered back would put her life and his on a collision course with a man who thought money could buy silence forever. He was wrong, and he had no idea what was coming for him. Marcus Whitfield had a rule about diners: never sit with his back to the door. 22 years of habits from a life he didn't talk about anymore had a way of sticking, even after he'd traded a uniform for a leather vest and a Harley Road King that needed a new clutch cable. He slid into the corner booth of the Blue Plate Diner on Charlotte Avenue at 6:15 in the morning, same as he did most Tuesdays, and ordered black coffee and eggs over easy from a waitress who'd stopped asking for his order because she already knew it. Outside, the September air still held onto summer's humidity, thick enough that his shirt had stuck to his back on the ride over. Nashville was waking up slow, the way it always did before the tourists and the traffic took over. Marcus liked this hour. It was honest. Nobody was performing for anybody yet. He was 42 years old, built like a man who'd spent a decade working construction after his time in the army. With a grey-streaked beard he kept short and forearms covered in tattoos that told a story most people didn't bother to ask about. He rode with the Steel Sentinels, a motorcycle club that spent more time doing toy drives for the Children's Hospital than anything the movies liked to suggest about men like him. But people saw the vest, the ink, the bike parked crooked in the lot, and they made their assumptions fast. He'd stopped correcting them years ago. Their loss, not his. The eggs came. He was 2 bites in when the door chimed, and a woman walked in who made the whole diner go quiet for half a second, the way a room does when something is wrong, and everyone feels it before they understand it. She was maybe mid-30s, in a long-sleeved shirt despite the heat, sunglasses on, even though the morning light hadn't found the windows yet. She moved carefully, like each step cost her something. Marcus noticed the way she favored her right side, the way her left hand trembled slightly as she reached for a booth 2 down from his own. She sat facing the wall. The waitress, a woman named Peggy, who'd worked this counter for 11 years, approached with a menu and a practiced smile that faltered the second she got close. Marcus watched Peggy's face change, watched her set the menu down without a word and walk to the back instead of taking an order. Marcus went back to his eggs, telling himself it wasn't his business. People had bad mornings. People wore sunglasses inside for all kinds of reasons that weren't his to guess at. But then the woman's hand came up to push her hair back, and her sleeve rode up an inch, and Marcus saw it. Raw, red, blistered skin along her wrist, the kind that didn't come from an accident with a curling iron or a stove. The kind that came from someone holding something against skin on purpose and holding it there. He set his fork down. Peggy came back with a young man in an apron, the manager, Marcus assumed, and the 2 of them spoke in low voices near the register, glancing over at the woman every few seconds, like they didn't know what to do with what they were seeing. Small towns and small diners weren't always equipped for this. Nashville had plenty of both energy and blind spots, and this diner, this early, this quiet, was clearly one of the blind spots. Marcus stood up. He wasn't a man who inserted himself easily into situations that weren't his. But something about the way she sat, spine straight and shoulders locked like she was bracing for a blow that hadn't come yet, told him nobody else in this room was going to move first. He walked over slowly, the way he'd learned to approach spooked animals and spooked people both. No sudden angles, hands visible, voice low. "Ma'am," he said, "I'm not going to bother you. I just want to make sure you're safe. Is there anybody I can call for you?" She flinched at his voice, drawing back into the booth like the wood might swallow her. Up close, Marcus could see beneath the sunglasses, a bruise blooming yellow-green at her cheekbone, days old, layered under something fresher. Her lips were cracked. Her hands, when they came out from beneath the table, wouldn't stop shaking. "I'm fine," she whispered. It was the kind of fine that meant the opposite. The kind people said when the alternative was too big to say out loud in public. Marcus didn't push. He'd learned that much from 20 years of watching men bulldoze past someone's fine and only make things worse. He crouched down instead, bringing himself to eye level rather than looming. "My name's Marcus," he said. "I ride with a group of guys, most of us old enough to know better and too stubborn to act like it. I'm not asking you to trust me. I'm asking if you want me to sit here a minute, and if you want anyone called, I'll do it. If you want me gone, I'll go." For a long moment she said nothing. The diner had gone fully silent now, other patrons pretending to eat while clearly listening. Peggy hovered by the register, phone in hand, uncertain. Then the woman reached up with a trembling hand and slid her sunglasses down an inch, just enough for Marcus to see her eyes, swollen, one nearly shut, red-rimmed from crying or smoke or both. "He did this to me," she said, barely above a breath. "Please, please don't let him find me." Marcus felt something in his chest go very still and very cold, the way it used to right before he had to make a decision that mattered. "Nobody's going to find you," he said. "Not today. What's your name?" "Denise," she said. "Okay, Denise." He kept his voice even, steady, the tone he used to calm frightened rookies on their first bad call, years ago, in a different life. "You're safe right now. I'm going to have my friend call for help, and I'm going to stay right here until it comes. That work for you?" She nodded, just barely, tears sliding silently down beneath the glasses. Marcus looked up at Peggy. "Call 911, ambulance and police both." Then quieter to the manager, "And bring her some water, nothing cold, room temp." The eggs on his plate went cold, forgotten. His coffee sat untouched, steam long gone. It would be hours before he thought about either one again. The paramedics arrived within 9 minutes, and the police 6 minutes after that. Marcus stayed exactly where he said he would, a solid presence in the booth across from Denise, saying little, offering nothing but steadiness. He'd learned that some people needed words, and some people needed silence, held like a blanket around them, and Denise needed the second kind. The responding officer was young, maybe 26, with the kind of nervous energy that came from not having seen enough of the world yet to stop being surprised by its cruelty. His name tag read, "Ofk, Boyle." He took one look at Denise's face and his jaw tightened. "Ma'am, can you tell me what happened?" Denise's hands twisted the hem of her sleeve. She looked at Marcus first, an unconscious check-in before she spoke. "My husband," she said. Grant Sutter." Her voice cracked on the name like it cost her something physical to say it. It's been going on a long time. Last night he got angry because dinner was late and he..." She stopped, breath hitching, her hand drifting toward her side where Marcus now understood the burn marks continued, hidden beneath her shirt. "He held me down and used the stove burner," she whispered. "On my side, my arm. He said if I ever told anyone, he'd make sure nobody would believe a word out of my mouth again." Officer Boyle's pen stopped moving for a beat too long before he caught himself and kept writing. Marcus watched the young officer's professionalism war visibly with the human reaction underneath it. The same reaction Marcus was suppressing in his own chest, a slow burning fury he'd learned a long time ago to keep leashed, because rage without control never helped anybody. "Where is Mr. Sutter now?" Boyle asked. "At the house. He doesn't know I left. I waited until he passed out." Denise's eyes darted to the window, scanning the parking lot like Grant Sutter might materialize from the pavement itself. He drinks. When he drinks, he sleeps hard, but not forever. If he wakes up and I'm not there, you don't have to worry about that right now, Marcus said quietly. You're not going back there. Not today. Not until you decide you want to. And even then, not alone. Boyle glanced at him. And you are? Marcus Whitfield. I was having breakfast. Saw her come in hurt, and nobody else was stepping up. He kept his tone plain, no defensiveness in it, because he had nothing to defend. I've got no stake in this beyond making sure she gets somewhere safe. The paramedics moved in to assess Denise's burns, and what they found made even the older paramedic's expression harden. Second-degree burns along her ribs and forearm, days-old bruising layered with fresh injury, evidence of a pattern rather than a single incident. They wanted to transport her to Vanderbilt for treatment. Denise's hands shook harder at the mention of a hospital, of paperwork, of records that Grant might somehow access. He works with a lawyer, she said. He always says he knows people, that nobody will side with me over him. Marcus had heard that kind of talk before, not from victims, but from men like Grant Sutter, men who used status and money as armor, who counted on the system moving slow and people moving scared. He'd seen good people crushed by exactly that combination during his years working private security details, before the motorcycle club had become less of a hobby and more of a second family. Denise, Marcus said, I know some people. Not lawyers who play golf with your husband's lawyer, people who actually do this work, domestic violence advocates, a shelter that's off the radar, folks who know how to keep a woman safe from a man who thinks he owns the world. You don't have to trust me all at once, but I'm going to give you the option, and it's yours to take or leave. Denise looked at him for a long moment, something behind her swollen eyes shifting. Not quite trust yet, but the ghost of it. The first crack of light in a door that had been shut for a long time. Why would you do this? She asked. You don't even know me. Marcus was quiet for a moment. The question deserved an honest answer, not a rehearsed one. 15 years ago, my sister was in a marriage like this, he said finally. I didn't know how bad it was until it was almost too late. I was 3 states away, working a job, telling myself it wasn't my business to interfere in somebody else's marriage. By the time I understood what was happening, she'd already been in the hospital twice. He paused. Old grief moving through him like a tide he'd learned to let pass without drowning in it. She's okay now. Got out. Rebuilt her life. But I made a promise to myself that I'd never again look away from something I could see clearly just because it was easier. Denise's eyes filled again, but something in her posture had loosened just slightly, like a held breath finally let go. Okay, she whispered. Okay, call them. The shelter Marcus called was called Haven Bridge, a non-profit tucked into a nondescript building in East Nashville that didn't advertise its purpose from the outside. No sign, no logo, just a brick facade that looked like any other small office. That anonymity was the point. Denise was admitted within the hour, her burns treated at Vanderbilt first. Under a false name, the advocate helped her adopt for hospital records, a precaution against Grant Sutter's threatened lawyer and whatever influence he claimed to wield. Marcus didn't leave until she was settled, which meant he spent most of his morning in a hospital waiting room, drinking machine coffee that tasted like scorched cardboard, ignoring 3 texts from his club brothers asking where he was. By early afternoon, a woman named Rachel Voss, the intake coordinator at Haven Bridge, found him in the waiting area. She was maybe 50, sharp-eyed, with the particular weariness of someone who'd spent 2 decades in advocacy work and had long since stopped being shocked by what people did to each other, only more determined to do something about it. You're the one who called it in, Rachel said, sitting across from him. It wasn't a question. I am. Most people don't stay this long. Most people call it in and go about their day feeling good about themselves. There was no accusation in her voice, just observation. "I don't have anywhere better to be," Marcus said. Rachel studied him for a moment. The vest, the tattoos, the size of him. And Marcus watched her make the same calculation everyone made, weighing the visual data against a growing pile of evidence that contradicted it. "She's asking for you," Rachel said finally. "Says she wants to say thank you before you go." Marcus followed her back through a set of secured doors into a small visitation room where Denise sat wrapped in a blanket, despite the warm afternoon, her arm freshly bandaged, an IV line taped to the back of her hand. She looked smaller than she had in the diner somehow, now that the adrenaline of the morning had drained out of her and left only exhaustion behind. "You didn't have to stay," she said. "I know. Nobody stays." Her voice was flat, matter-of-fact in a way that told him this wasn't self-pity but simple, learned truth. "Not my neighbors. Not the woman at the pharmacy who saw the bruises last spring and just handed me my prescription like she hadn't noticed anything. Not even my own sister, because Grant made sure I stopped talking to her 2 years ago. Everybody sees, nobody stays." Marcus pulled a chair closer, keeping distance but closing it enough to make clear he was listening. "I'm not everybody," he said. "And for what it's worth, staying isn't hard. It's the easiest thing in the world once you decide it matters more than being comfortable." Denise was quiet for a while, picking at the edge of the blanket. "He's going to come looking. He always finds a way. 2 years ago, I tried to leave, stayed at a friend's for 4 days, and he showed up at her work, made a scene, got her fired, trying to protect me. I went back because I couldn't let that keep happening to people who tried to help me." "That's not going to happen this time," Marcus said. "Haven Bridge doesn't operate the way a friend's apartment does. There's no address he can trace, no employer he can pressure, and there's a difference between an angry man showing up somewhere and an angry man showing up somewhere with people around who know exactly what he is and aren't afraid of him. You make it sound simple. It's not simple. It's just possible. Those aren't the same thing, but people mix them up all the time and give up too early because of it." Rachel, standing near the door, cleared her throat gently. "There's a legal advocate here twice a week who can walk you through an order of protection, Denise. No cost, and given the burn evidence and the hospital documentation, plus a witness account," she nodded toward Marcus, "you'd have a strong foundation if you want to pursue it." Denise's hands tightened on the blanket. "He said if I ever tried—" "He's not in this room," Marcus said quietly. "He doesn't get a vote on what you decide today." The silence that followed stretched long, filled with everything Denise wasn't yet ready to say out loud. Marcus didn't rush her. He'd learned that healing, like trust, moved at its own pace, and pushing too hard only ever set people back further than where they'd started. "I want to think about it," Denise finally said. "Just give me tonight. I don't want to make any decisions I can't take back while I still feel like this." "Take all the time you need," Marcus said, standing. "I'll check in tomorrow, if that's all right. Not to push, just to know you're okay." For the first time since he'd met her, something that might have been the beginning of a smile touched the corner of Denise's mouth. "Nobody's ever asked my permission to check on me before. Grant just showed up wherever I was. Called it love." "That's not love," Marcus said. "That's a leash with better marketing." Marcus kept his word. He came back the next day, and the day after that, never staying long, never pushing, bringing nothing more than a cup of coffee from the diner and an hour of ordinary conversation that had nothing to do with Grant Sutter or Burns or fear. Slowly, over the course of that week, Denise began to unfold. Small things at first, a joke about the terrible hospital coffee, a mention that she used to teach 3rd grade before Grant convinced her to quit, a flicker of the woman she'd been before 4 years of erosion had worn her down to this fragile, watchful version of herself. On the 5th day, Rachel called Marcus with urgency in her voice that hadn't been there before. Grant Sutter showed up at the diner on Charlotte Avenue this morning, asking Peggy questions. Somebody must have talked. Marcus felt the old cold stillness settle into his chest again, the one he associated with moments that required precision rather than anger. Does he know where Denise is? Not the shelter address, but he's not stupid, and he's got money for people who can find things out. I think he's circling. Marcus called two of his club brothers that afternoon, Dean Holloway, a former MP with a build like a retired linebacker, and Wesley Cormack, quieter but sharper, a man who'd spent a career in loss prevention and had a memory for faces and license plates that bordered on photographic. He explained the situation. Neither of them hesitated. "We'll take shifts near the shelter's outer perimeter," Dean said. "Not close enough to spook her, not close enough to violate the shelter's privacy protocols. Just eyes on the street." It was Wesley who spotted the grey Silverado parked across from the shelter's unmarked lot 2 days later, engine idling. A man behind the wheel who matched the photo Denise had reluctantly provided from an old hidden phone contact list. Grant Sutter, mid-40s, broad-shouldered, a face that might have been handsome once, before something mean had settled permanently into it. Wesley called Marcus immediately. Marcus arrived within 15 minutes, parking his bike a block away and approaching on foot, calm and unhurried, the way he'd learned years ago that a slow approach unsettled aggressive men more than a fast one, because it signaled control rather than fear. Grant rolled down his window when Marcus knocked on it, his expression shifting from irritation to a sneer once he clocked the vest, the tattoos, the beard. "Help you with something?" Grant asked, the tone of a man used to intimidating people smaller or softer than himself. "You're parked outside a domestic violence shelter," Marcus said evenly. "That's a problem, whether or not you meant it to be." Grant's jaw tightened. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Sure you do." Marcus kept his voice level, no heat in it, which seemed to unsettle Grant more than shouting would have. "You're looking for your wife. I understand the impulse. What I need you to understand is that this is the last day you're going to indulge it anywhere near this building. You don't know anything about my marriage. I know a woman came into a diner with third-degree burns and couldn't stop shaking when a stranger spoke to her gently. I know what that tells me about a marriage without needing you to fill in any blanks." Marcus's voice hadn't risen an inch, but something in it had hardened, the kind of tone that came from a place beyond anger, somewhere closer to absolute certainty. "You've got two choices right now. You drive away, and you let the legal process handle whatever comes next. Or you stay parked here, and I call the police and report a man surveilling a domestic violence shelter, which is a crime, and which will look extremely bad, layered on top of an active investigation into felony domestic assault." Grant's hands tightened on the wheel, knuckles whitening. For a moment, Marcus thought the man might get out of the truck, might try something stupid fueled by wounded ego and years of never being told no. Dean and Wesley had drifted closer without being asked, a wall of quiet, unmistakable presence flanking Marcus on either side. Something in Grant's calculation shifted when he saw the three of them, the reality of the math finally landing. "This isn't over," Grant muttered, throwing the truck into gear. "It is for today," Marcus said, "and every day after this if you're smart." The truck pulled away, tires chirping against the pavement in a final petty display of the power Grant no longer had. Marcus watched it go, jaw tight, the adrenaline of the confrontation slowly draining out of him and leaving behind something heavier. The understanding that this wasn't over, not really, not until the legal system caught up to what three men on a sidewalk could only temporarily hold at bay. He called the police to file a report on the surveillance, then called Rachel to update her on what happened. Then he sat on the curb for a long moment, elbows on his knees, and thought about his sister 15 years ago, and the version of himself who hadn't shown up in time. This time, he thought, this time I was here. Denise filed the order of protection 9 days after the diner. The legal advocate at Haven Bridge helped her compile everything. The hospital records, the burn photographs, a written statement, and crucially, Marcus's account of both the original incident and the parking lot confrontation, along with Dean and Wesley's corroborating statements. Grant's attorney tried the tactics Denise had feared for years, questioning her credibility, suggesting the injuries were self-inflicted or accidental, implying that a woman who'd stayed with her husband for 4 years couldn't possibly be a genuine victim now. But the burns told their own story, layered and undeniable, patterns of injury that no accident could replicate. And Marcus's testimony, delivered plainly and without embellishment in a courtroom that had clearly expected someone rougher, someone less composed, carried a weight that surprised even the judge. "You're a stranger to the petitioner," the judge said, reviewing his statement. "What compelled you to intervene?" "Because nobody else was going to," Marcus answered simply, "and because I've learned that decency isn't about what you look like. It's about what you do when you see somebody who needs help and you're capable of giving it." The order of protection was granted. Full custody proceedings for the divorce would take months to resolve, and Grant Sutter's lawyer would drag out every possible delay, but the first hardest wall had been built, and it would hold. 3 weeks later, Denise moved into a small apartment in East Nashville, arranged through a transitional housing program Rachel had connected her with. It wasn't much: second-hand furniture, walls that needed paint, a view of a parking lot instead of anything scenic, but it was hers, locked with a key that only she controlled, and that made it worth more than any luxury Grant Sutter's money could have bought. Marcus helped her move boxes on a warm October Saturday, joined by Dean and Wesley and 2 other club members who'd heard the story second-hand and shown up without being asked, the way the Steel Sentinels always did when one of their own decided something mattered. Denise watched 5 grown men in leather vests carrying a second-hand couch up 2 flights of stairs, laughing about something Dean had said, and felt something in her chest loosen that had been clenched tight for 4 years. "I used to think men like you were dangerous," she admitted to Marcus later, sitting on her new porch step, watching the sun drop behind the rooftops of the neighborhood. The bikes, the tattoos, all of it. "Grant used to say guys like you were exactly the kind of trouble decent people avoided." "Funny thing about people who hurt others," Marcus said. "They're always quick to point at somebody else and call them dangerous. Distraction technique. Works better than people think. I know that now." Denise turned the burn scar on her forearm over in the fading light, no longer hiding it beneath long sleeves the way she once had. It had started to feel less like a wound and more like evidence of something she'd survived. "I judged you the second you walked over to my booth. I thought you were going to make things worse." "I get that a lot," Marcus said, without bitterness. "I used to let it bother me. Now I figure the people who matter eventually see past it, and the people who don't were never going to matter much to my life anyway." Denise was quiet for a moment, watching the last light fade from the sky. "Peggy told me later that half the diner was afraid to help me that morning, afraid it wasn't their business, afraid of getting involved, afraid of a dozen things that all boiled down to the same excuse. You were the only one who didn't hesitate." "I did hesitate," Marcus admitted. "For about 4 seconds, long enough to almost talk myself out of it the way people do. Then I thought about what happens to somebody if everybody in the room makes that same choice at the same time. Somebody has to go first. Might as well be the person who noticed." Denise smiled, a real one this time, small but unguarded, the first Marcus had seen from her without pain shadowing the edges of it. "For what it's worth," she said, "I don't think I would have made it out if you hadn't stayed. Not really out, not the way I am now." "You would have found a way," Marcus said. "People usually do, eventually. I just made it happen a little sooner than it might have otherwise." 6 months later, Denise returned to teaching, taking a position at an elementary school across town, far enough from her old neighborhood that Grant's shadow no longer stretched over her daily life. She kept in occasional touch with Marcus and the club, a coffee here, a check-in there, the kind of quiet, undemanding friendship built on the specific gravity of a single terrible morning and everything that had grown from it. The divorce finalized the following spring. Grant Sutter, facing a felony assault charge in addition to the divorce proceedings, accepted a plea deal that kept him out of Denise's life with a 5-year restraining order attached to it, though everyone who'd watched the case unfold knew that Denise's real victory had happened long before any judge signed anything, the morning she found the courage to whisper the truth to a stranger in a diner, and the stranger who chose, against every assumption people had made about him his whole life, to stay. Marcus never did finish that first cup of coffee. It sat cold and forgotten on the table at the Blue Plate Diner while everything that mattered happened around it. He liked to think sometimes that Peggy still remembered that morning whenever she poured coffee for a stranger who looked like trouble, but turned out to be exactly the opposite.